The world before the Exalted overthrew the enemies of the gods is barely conceivable. Scholars who have tried to study it have found that it cannot be studied in its entirety, since the few records that remain use language structures and formats that are very hard to understand. Some of those who lived through this devastating war have given scholars some valuable information, but even their records and recollections consist to a large degree from confusing tangents and odd omissions. As we talked about in our previous Exalted lore video, the Primordials, who later became known as the enemies of the gods, were beings of vast impossible scopes, and defeating them would not only have permanent ramifications on the world itself, but on concepts, abstracts and ideas that one day existed in this world but no longer do. What is known from this time is that humanity was ruled by the Dragon Kings, who in turn worshipped the unconquered sun. The Dragon Kings found the Primordials' vast and impossible scopes confusing to try to comprehend, and instead turned their attention and devotion to the gods. The gods themselves had grown discontent at their slavery at the hands of their creators, but they had been made so that they could raise no hand against them. The gods recognized that the only way to defeat and overthrow their makers was to empower beings so far beneath the Primordials' notice that they could never see them coming. They didn't choose the Dragon Kings, instead they chose the humans under their heels. As I mentioned in the previous Exalted lore video, the details vary from edition to edition, and the developers for 3rd edition in particular had made a conscious decision to stay away from carving an ancient history in stone. The first stage, and what came before, is meant to be a time of great mystery and something the storyteller can use much to their own discretion. The 2nd edition, however, had a very different outlook. It presented the ancient history and the metaphysics of the world in great detail. For the purpose of this video, I've taken information from all 3 editions and created an amalgamation of lore that's not strictly canon in 3rd edition. Most of the information will come from 2nd edition, but I made deliberate omissions and additions to avoid contradicting established 3rd edition lore and information that the developers have publicly stated is no longer canon. Keep in mind that any information presented in this video could be made obsolete by future 3rd edition supplements. Instead, see this as a source of inspiration for when exploring ancient history in your own game, and use what details you feel are fitting for your own story. This video will discuss the birth and rise of the Incarnae. It will focus entirely on what led up to their uprising and not what happened after. Instead, future lore videos will go into detail about the creation of the Exalted, the primordial war itself, and its aftermath. This story begins at the dawn of creation, when a green sun shed its viridian glow over all things. The sun was Liger, an aspect of the primordial king that presided over everything their kin had wrought as a symbol of their reign. This sun cast no shadows, and therefore prevented the shadow of all things, later known as the Ebon Dragon, from passing into existence. This displeased the shadow, who came to the primordial king in a whisper and suggested that creation wasn't worthy of their perfect light. Move your fire to Yushan, they said, to forever stand as proof of your supreme design. The primordial king did as the shadow suggested, but they decided to make another contribution to creation that would be the most outstanding and spectacular thing the world would ever see, causing their primordial kin to be in awe of their tyrant's greatness. They stole an aspect of Autoton, the Great Maker, and demanded of Cytheria, the Divine Ignition, to contain and purify the tyrant's own flames into a fire so hot that not even day could stand its heat. From this, they created the Daystar, the pure white sun that devoured the wild and embraced the world in never-ending light. But the shadow of all things had different plans for this brilliant star. They created their own antithesis and imbued it with the power necessary to form an everlasting darkness. The creation of the Daystar gave them the context they needed to focus on their own nemesis, a god the opposite of themselves, a being of light, justice and hope to act as the Daystar spirit. This shining figure would be so bright that it would give endless shape to their maker's terrible darkness. The primordial king wasn't satisfied with the creation of the spirit. They wanted the sun and its god to stand unconquered before all adversity, so they devised a series of labors and tests to face them with, breaking them down and building them anew for every failure until they were able to conquer all. Because the shadow was the most vile and wicked of all things, the primordial king enlisted their aid in constructing these tests and making them cruel. By the wisdom of Cytheria, they set a limit to the number of tests they required. Were the Daystar's god to complete them all, they would have their soul incarnate. From the newborn god's first breath, alongside its infant star, its existence became a series of dangerous and horrifying trials and tribulations. They were brought to the end of time where they were swallowed by the wolf that devours all, but they shone through fiercely, causing the shadows to flee from within and tearing the beast inside out. The babe emerged a child, with its infant star a faithful flame. Another time they took the star away from the child god, and they made 9 others to dance around it in the sky and obscure its light with their own. The primordials gave the child god a bow, telling him to strike them down before creation was burned away. The god realized that the shot would risk to harm his friends, so he loaded his bow with a mighty tree and fired it into the horizon, knowing that fetch was the game his star loved the most. As the day star chased the tree, the god struck down all of the 9 stars and took their brightness as his own. Another test brought him to Kimber, the sea that marched against the flame, who hated him and wished for nothing more than to drown him and his youth star in the waters. She carried him on a bark with the day star on his head, coercing and seducing him to touch her waters and swim towards the depths. He stayed true to this task and reached the farthest west, where he set the day star into her waters, but as its fire wasn't doused, Kimber screamed. In another test, the young soul incarnate stood upon the snout of Isidoros, one hand holding his beloved star and 2 steering the primordial's tusks. He drove the black boar that twists the skies deep into the far away, where they battled with a primordial enemy and together knocked it down. But Sol's true purpose was learned in his final test. The shadow of all things took the Daystar to a cave at the infinite end of pure chaos, where horrors and detritus cast away during the birth of creation had been sealed. With the light of existence gone, the ultimate darkness rejoiced, for only he knew the secret location of the cave. But Sol found and returned from that oblivion, bearing a Daystar brighter than ever before. This made the shadow of all things feel tremendous fear, as he for the first time realized that even his own darkness could be swallowed up in Sol Incarnate's brilliance. The primordials both loved and hated what they had wrought. Their pride, hubris and excitement at this game made them celebrate the success of Sol and his Daystar's masteries, while simultaneously being reduced to scorn and disbelief that their tests had failed. In the end, they couldn't believe how perfect their creation had become, so they exclaimed that Sol was truly the unconquered sun. The primordial king hung the Daystar in creation's sky, and the shadow of all things seeped through the cracks in the darkest places, empowering himself with the sun's bright light. The primordial king thought that by allowing such brilliance to be apart from themselves, they'd increase their own majesty. When they looked at the sun, they felt like they were looking in a mirror. But the primordial king was wrong. They had set a value of perfection outside of their crushing tyranny, and in a sense made something more brilliant than themselves. But they had also been tricked into creating a light which gave real power to the ultimate darkness. Because of this, they looked upon the soul incarnate and infused him with indomitable will. He was to answer directly and exclusively to the holy tyrant. The Daystar and the unconquered sun are both one and separate. The sun that shines from creation's sky is the unconquered sun's domain, but it's also his weapon, his friend and his chariot. In the 2nd edition it's also a robotic war machine vehicle supertank, but I'd like to ignore that particular detail. Together with the Daystar, the unconquered sun completed all of the labors and was deemed worthy of existence by the Imperial Chaos. He was given charge over creation to protect it from the wild and other threats beyond its shores. The unconquered sun together with the Daystar is the greatest force to have ever existed. But even today, as the unconquered sun has retreated to the games of divinity, the Daystar is continuing its journey across the sky. The unconquered sun is the chief war god of heaven and the divine ruler of the celestial court. He not only embodies light, but also heroic virtue, justice and limitless perfection. He is the antithesis of the darkest of the primordials. He was made to be everything the shadow was not, and then by his existence give the shadow true substance, definition and power in the world. Before the gods' rebellion, the unconquered sun spent millennia patrolling the borders of creation, spreading light across the world, enforcing the substance of reality and standing as a bright shining warning to things beyond creation's shores. But a being of infinite perfection was not content with being the slave to the primordials, especially not the ultimate darkness, whom he knew that he empowered through his existence. The unconquered sun began to devise a plan to bless the best and brightest of mankind with the divine touch of the Incarnae, so that they could ride forth at the head of a celestial army and do what the gods were never meant to do, fight and even slay the primordials. During the making of the world, it became apparent that creation couldn't move beyond the brilliance of sustained day. The unconquered sun was so dominant above all other facets of existence that life itself was stunted by his constant presence. To counterbalance this, the primordials engineered the night so that the unconquered sun could rest and so that creation could rest from him. The guardian of the night became the moon, and Luna was its spirit. The chief architect behind the creation of Luna was Cytherea, the divine ignition. She had already provided her wisdom in the making of the unconquered sun, and she knew that Luna needed to be what the sun was not. Inspired by the Ignis Divine's embodied perfection, Cytherea wanted the moon to have qualities the sun had not. Luna became a being of near perfection, of magnificence and grace and of appreciable definition, yet they were indefinite. They were touched by traits shared by the unconquered sun, but they were defined by their differences from him. Where he was the day, Luna would be night. Where he introduced order, Luna would introduce chaos. Where he was the pinnacle of all possible perfection, Luna would be the impossible made possible. And while the sun's light expressed all things within creation, Luna's light would draw upon the forces outside. But Cytherea couldn't realize Luna alone. To complete her design, she went to Oramus, the dragon beyond the world, whose mind dwelled in alien vistas beyond perception, an infinite forge of the impossible that stirred the very wild into forms and patterns by the movement of its thoughts. In the forge of Oramus, Luna was born from Cytherea's vision, and they brought what was apart from creation into creation in a singular form. Once, Luna stood alongside the unconquered sun, and creation fell down before them in love and terror. Risking their life in their very first taste of it, Luna went to the unconquered sun and put her hands on his face, telling him words only he could hear. Luna became the only being to have looked upon the true face of the unconquered sun, to gaze upon his full intensity without being destroyed. In that instant, Luna's moon, the silver share, eclipsed Sol's sun, the day star, for the very first time. Luna's form is ever-changing, and the movement of their silver share tugs and shapes at forces outside of the sun's reach. They are a blazing celestial god, allied and rooted firmly to creation, fiercely loyal to the unconquered sun, but also someone who fills the world with refreshing chaos, as if taken from the wild beyond. But Luna isn't the wild. They look beyond the wild, where the dreams of Oramus create an existential well of alien concepts and hellish landscapes, but while Luna hails from there, they look even beyond that, having become the impossible made possible. Luna was also made to seduce the elements. They can call the tides and wheel their face in winds and clouds. They can call up ants from the desert and wolves from the woods to attend them in their prayers. They also called out to the maidens across time, awakening them from their primordial dreaming, and it is Luna who draws the sun out from his slumber each morning. But Luna also draws in Gaia, the primordial, because Cytherea knew that Gaia wanted to leave creation behind to continue her never-ending quest beyond the shores of the world. Cytherea wanted to keep Gaia around, and Luna became a weapon for that purpose. They are a strange but strong deity, made reminiscent of the Fairfolk by design. Cytherea wanted Luna to engage with the wild as an envoy of the primordials, but they outgrew their destined purpose when they fell in love with Gaia, just like Gaia had fallen for them. By Oramus, Luna sees the beyond, but by Cytherea they become it. Luna pulls other worlds against creation, and they shed dreams of endless imagination into the atmosphere. In other words, Luna causes creation to feed upon its outer realms in order to bolster its own solid reality. They use chaos in order to allow creation order. In order to be born, Luna had to manipulate and destroy all of the rival concepts. Every other moon god Oramus could imagine and Cytherea could produce, Luna consumed, absorbing their essences into themselves to complete their own creation. This is represented by the phases of the moon and the original casts of the lunar Exalted that would one day be created by her blessing. They are a deity of many forms, but certain truths still hold fast. Luna's nature is in their ability to change. While the unconquered sun took the shape of a many-armed dragon in honor of the dragon kings who worshipped him, Luna took any shape they needed to get closer to creation than the unconquered sun could ever do. The maidens are a mystery even unto the primordials themselves. They are the handiwork of the primordials, but they are also omnitemporal, having been known before creation even existed and thought to have been created in a future the primordials cannot foresee. Because of this, none of the makers of the world knows which primordial created the maidens or when. From the moment the primordials began to encounter each other in the wild's chaos, their proximities created confluences of factual existence and natural law, which interfaced concepts like time, space, matter and gravity. All of this were carried on the backs of 5 sisters calling themselves the Fates. It was obvious to the primordials that the sisters weren't a cosmic accident, but the evidence of an intelligent design they had yet to undertake. Most primordials were amused by this, but others were frightful or indifferent to it. The shadow of all things, the primordial who'd one day become the Ebon Dragon, hated the sisters because their emergence shattered his own designs for a fate after his own making. Some looked to Autoton, who thought they could be his but didn't know. Others thought they could have been dreamed up by Oramus, but since the maidens were a known thing, they were beyond his sight. The shadow of all things rankled at the thought of them, while secretly suspicious that they may have been his creations gone awry and moving strings beyond his control. When the maidens themselves were asked of their origin, they all looked to Jupiter, who wouldn't say. Regardless of their source, by the time of creation's making, the primordials had fully incorporated the fates into their plans for its construction. It was when Luna split day into night that the fates awakened from their slumber and could for the first time approach creation in person. They merged at a single point in time and reached the fullness of their evolution, shedding their cryptic identity as the fates to become the maidens. The primordials thought their work complete. They saw the maidens as the product of their genius, designed solely to service the loom of fate. But the maidens had other plans, because they had known the primordials since before creation and despised them for their short-sightedness. Looking back and forward across the ages, the maidens witnessed the dreams and tragedies of Luna and the unconquered sun, fell in love with them from afar, and had set out on a perilous journey through time to meet Luna on creation's first night. In the other Incarnae, they saw kindred spirits in an otherwise lonely existence. They also saw the potential to be rid of their noxious makers. But while the maidens knew that it was possible to overthrow the primordials, they couldn't be certain of the outcome. The unconquered sun believed that oracular vision had become distorted as time spun itself in an orbit around its crushing gravity. The maidens couldn't foresee the exalted which were on the unconquered sun's mind. They also failed to foresee their own enslavement to the games of divinity after the end of the coming war. They risked everything to stand beside the unconquered sun in his revolution, knowing that, with the primordials gone, the fate of creation would entirely be in the maidens' hands. The Maidens of Destiny are often seen as a single unit rather than 5 distinct beings. This is convenient, because together they govern a common dominion in the form of destiny, but the Maidens are still each individuals with 5 distinct phases of an indivisible whole. Mercury, the Maiden of Uranus, is rooted in the future and always moving forward, even through time. Even today she is the least addicted to the games of divinity and is able to distance herself from them the most. Venus, the Maiden of Serenity, is arguably the most well-known and personable of the sisters, as she is beloved and hallowed both by other gods and by her countless worshippers. Venus is said to be the most fascinating and beautiful being in all existence, the maker and breaker of hearts. She is who gives love and takes it away. Her defense of love is so fierce that it has even given the unconquered sun pause. Mars, the Maiden of Battles, is the most terrifying of the maidens. Ruthlessly pragmatic and quick to take offense. Any business not having to do with battles, contests or war distracts her from her careful planning and causes her savage irritation. In truth, the destinies she weaves depict the death of millions, and the gravity of this burden is not lost on her. Jupiter, the Maiden of Secrets, once had no dominion but simply existed as the caretaker of her sisters. Once she happened upon a primordial behemoth set to guard all the secrets in creation. She told the beast that she had a secret that it had not, and then asked it what her divine dominion might be. When it didn't know, it returned to its cave, rummaged through its secrets, throwing them out into the snow. Jupiter was quick to pick the secrets up, claiming every secret from the cave. When the beast slumped back outside to admit defeat, Jupiter was no longer there. When asked about the veracity of this tale, Jupiter simply smiles as is her way. Saturn, the Maiden of Endings, is seated close at hand to the unconquered sun and lingering in the shadow of Luna. She hopes to be overshadowed by the majesty of her peers and to be the object to which the eye is the least drawn. As the Maiden of Endings, the distraction of her presence makes life difficult to live. Some scholars believe that there could have been other maidens long ago, or future maidens yet unborn. In one legend, the unknown Maiden of Wisdom stood in the path of the 3 spheres cataclysm and doused its fires with their essence, shattering herself forward and backward in time to spare some part of creation. If this is true, it couldn't be known, so it's likely that it's not. The 5 elemental dragons are gods birthed by Gaia to act as the foundation of creation, like the wheels beneath a carriage. Today, they are the lords of the terrestrial bureaucracy, responsible for overseeing its hierarchy of spirits. They are similar in power to the Incarnae, moving through the dragon lines of creation and influencing the world itself. Without these gods, there would be no domains or geomancy. Without Mela, the elemental dragon of air, the air would grow stale. Without the Nad, the elemental dragon of water, rivers wouldn't flow. While lesser gods and elementals manipulate local weathers, Mel and Denad oversee all climate. Sextus Gilis, the elemental dragon of wood, oversee all growth, and together these three elemental dragons permit all mortal life. Hesiod, the elemental dragon of fire, and Pasiap, the elemental dragon of earth, are now asleep. But once, at the dawn of creation, they crack the land with earthquakes and pierce the crust with volcanoes. Creation was a place filled with nature's wrath, and within these violent elements ruled behemoths and dragon kings. It was first when the primordials brought forth the race of humankind that Gaia ordered the dragons of fire and earth to lay down and rest. The climate grew mild so that this young race could survive and multiply. It was with Gaia's tutelage and the aid of the elemental dragons that Incarnae learned the secrets of creating life unlike themselves. They began to work on a race of 5 great beings who would regulate the natural processes of creation's elements. These were the Mindful Forest, Great Garda, Oseko, Urval, and Windmaster, 5 titanic elemental beings sworn to the Incarnae rather than the primordials themselves. These titanic beings would later aid the celestial host in their war against the enemies of the gods, but that's a story for another video. Not much is known about the 5 elemental dragons, but immaculate texts portrays them as the purest expression of creation's essence, too pure even to exist within a manifested form. While they are accepted as gods similar to but yet distant from the Incarnae, some scholars believe that they are the fetish souls of Gaia, an aspect of herself carved into the foundation of creation. If this is true, then perhaps creation's survival is dependent upon Gaia's existence. And maybe this is why Cytherea was so determined to create what led to Luna's and Gaia's bond to each other. It was the love between these two beings that saved Gaia from the primordial war. And while Cytherea herself was cast down together with her other kin, perhaps her love for creation was so great that she didn't want to see it swallowed up in the gods' rebellion. Maybe this so-called enemy of the gods not only saved her sister Gaia, but saved creation as a whole from the gods' rebellion. In the next Exalted lore video, we'll talk about the creation of the Exalted and what finally led up to the war that led to the Age of Man. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe if you like what I'm doing and want to see more. Until next time, see you in creation.